Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, let's answer a number of questions on gut health, most specifically on constipation, bloating, leaky gut, and parasites. Welcome to Dr. Ruscio Radio, providing practical, science-based insights into health, exploring the importance of nutrition, lifestyle, and gut health through conversations with experts, research reviews, and personal stories. We break through the bias and the noise to bring you simple, trustworthy information that matters. The good news, as I like to always say, is there are many tools in our toolkit to improve your gut health. And I'm hoping that throughout the discussion, you'll, of course, grab a few pointers, but also see that there's a lot of overlap with the therapeutics. And sometimes just a nuanced understanding of how to best apply a given tool. Let's say supplemental fiber, which can help constipation, but can also flare it, can allow you to use these natural and safe tools as effectively as possible. Because I've observed that there doesn't seem to be a shortage of tools. You can go online and buy whatever you want or read about whatever you like. I think the real miss is knowing how to use these tools effectively. And as someone who was going to go into orthopedic medicine, but decided to divert my path, given the gut issues I had while I was a pre-med student, I've been at this for a long time, well over 10 years in clinical practice, and then really a lifelong dedication to improving gut health. And so because of that, I'm eager to field your questions. We'll start off with one by Kendra. She poses the question, I'm dealing with constipation where I won't go for a few days until I take a laxative. I've tried water, prunes, and fiber, and nothing works. What should I do? Okay, so there are a few options for you here. And I'd like to think about the question of constipation or what to do about constipation with the framework of, is this constipation with other symptoms or is it constipation by itself? That does skew how we use these tools slightly. So I'm not sure if you've tried a low FODMAP diet, but that is certainly something that you may want to consider. And there's a standard low FODMAP and a paleo low FODMAP, plus a vegetarian low FODMAP, and we'll provide links in the description to give you either diet that you can try. Any one will work. It just depends on what sort of diet plan are you already on or trying to adhere to. And probiotics is another one to consider if you're having symptoms. So this is for the people with constipation plus pain, gas, bloating, maybe reflux, maybe even something like insomnia or low mood, because we're thinking that it's not just purely constipation, it's constipation wrapped in a constellation of other symptoms. And so we're thinking a bit more broadly to treat your ecosystem rather than just something to help facilitate the passage of bowels. With probiotics in particular, it may take up to 3 months to see full resolution. So keep that in mind, and I'll show you a study on this in a moment. Now, if you're not having those other symptoms, this is where retrialing fiber may be helpful. Probably the best evidence to either use psyllium or modified citrus pectin, or maybe even a combination of the two. So you may want to, again, if you're not having other symptoms, try these fibers in particular. Magnesium is another option. You've probably tried this, but just to put it out there. And also prokinetics, something like Iberogast, Motil-Pro. There's another one called Prokine, I believe. So the prokinetics are natural agents that can help with the motility mechanism in the gut. And if these all fail, you may want to consider a prokinetic medication. The most effective one for constipation is Resolor, by the way. There was a recent review paper finding that. And the other thing I don't feel applies to you, but just want to make sure to voice this. If you're having straining and difficulty passing your bowels, that might indicate that the musculature is mistimed. Meaning, if you're thinking of the Satish Rao example, which I really like, a tube of toothpaste, the cap muscles have to relax and the tube muscles have to squeeze. And in some people, the cap stays contracted and the tube doesn't squeeze. And this is where pelvic floor biofeedback can be helpful. Now, coming over to the probiotics, just to give you a bit more specifics. As you see in this diagram, we advocate for using 3 different types of probiotics together. And this, if you've tried probiotics and haven't noticed a difference, might be the difference between success or failure with probiotics. This is our clinical observation, but you've likely heard me discuss the 3 different types: blends of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, or Saccharomyces boulardii, a healthy fungus, or soil-based probiotics. So if you haven't used all 3 together, you may want to do that, because I believe what happens here is the synergistic benefit is more conducive to achieving balance in the microbiota and therefore improvements in your symptoms. And I said a moment ago that it may take you up to 3 months. And this was the most noteworthy study that really opened my eyes to being even a bit more patient than I was at baseline with probiotics. And what you're seeing here are 2 lines: placebo and control. What do you know? Placebo and control both improve with their constipation. Well, this is because the mind is powerful. And if you're given a pill, even if it's inert, a sugar pill, but you think it's going to help you, your body will actually produce a benefit. But look at this. When hitting around the month 2 mark, that's when the probiotic interventional group started to see more improvements in their constipation than the placebo group. So perhaps give yourself up to 3 months on a probiotic and consider using the triple therapy probiotic for a more comprehensive probiotic protocol. Okay, hope that helps. Next question is from Gloria. I'm currently experiencing bloating and constipation. I bought Dr. Ruscio's book and I'm following the protocol of probiotics and antimicrobials. I have been on this protocol for 1 month. The bloating and the constipation are slowly getting better, but are not resolved. What else can I do? Gloria, great question. The thing here I would lead with is more is not always better. I say this in the clinic, and I'm sure if any of my patients are watching this, they're probably shaking their heads in agreement, that I will take slow, steady progress any day. Sure, it's nice when you have those home runs where in a month things are hugely improved. But thinking about a bell curve distribution, there will be people at the tails, the fast responders and the slower responders. And then most people, kind of like that last study indicated, it may take a bit of time, not forever, months, not years. But if you're seeing indications of improvement, that's an excellent sign. So remember, more is not better, because we run the risk, if we're too aggressive, that your system may not like what we're doing and you may have a negative reaction and therefore a setback. So I would stick with it and see how month 2 goes, month 3 goes. And then remember, the book also has other answers: an elemental diet reset, prokinetics, and fiber, which can also help leverage some of the groundwork that you lay when going through the preliminary dietary changes, elimination, reintroduction dieting, that is, probiotics and antimicrobials. Also, are you exercising? This is another important thing, especially as it pertains to both bloating and constipation, that exercise has been shown to help with this. And ironically, it seems that if you move, the contents of your bowels also move. So if you're not exercising, I would do the best that you can to make that a more consistent practice. And again, the last study that we covered for constipation specifically, it wasn't until the subjects surpassed the 2-month mark that they really saw improvements in their constipation. Emilio poses the question: I've been diagnosed with silent reflux and I'm currently taking reflux medication. I've tried many diets, but my symptoms keep getting worse. What else can I try? Well, if you haven't done an elimination diet, I'm assuming you have. I'll just sort of earmark that. A low FODMAP diet is also something to consider. And when people say many diets, it just depends, is the low FODMAP something that's come across your radar screen or not? And I'll share with you one study from the journal Nutrients that found people who went on a higher versus lower FODMAP diet experienced improvements in their reflux and IBS when they went lower FODMAP. There's also some data for probiotics improving reflux. And some of these studies even use concurrently probiotics with reflux or acid-lowering medication, so they can be used together. Again, check this with your doctor. Always check this with your doctor first, but just to point to what's been done in some of the research thus far. Something else to trial would be HCl, hydrochloric acid. And we have a full video on this that gives you the deeper dive. But indicators that you may be a viable candidate for HCl would be if there is any autoimmune condition, any history of anemia, and also if you are above or near the age of 65, along with the obvious symptoms of prolonged fullness and reflux, and even potentially silent reflux. Here is the protocol in terms of how we recommend using hydrochloric acid. As context, you'll hear some online or just some recommendations that you should keep taking hydrochloric acid until you feel a warmness or a burning, and then take 1 capsule less. I strongly disagree with that. I think that is way overkill. If you've gotten to 4 capsules per meal, as this slide indicates, and you're not noticing improvement, that at least tells me that you don't need hydrochloric acid. Because if you do need it, it'll be fairly obvious. And if at 4 capsules per meal after a couple days, if you've worked your way up, start with 1 capsule per meal, give that a couple days, go to 2 for a couple days, go to 3 capsules per meal for a couple days. If you haven't seen improvements after 4, then 4 capsules per meal, then you likely don't need HCl. And again, all these recommendations, guys, check them with your healthcare provider first, because I only have a small snippet of information, but trying to give you answers to move on. I want to share everything that I've learned in my career as a gut nerd. And also, of course, the clinic is there for you if you need some consultation to help guide you along your path. Oh, and by the way, guys, reminder, please like, subscribe, and comment. I really enjoy the comments. They give me ideas for future videos. Okay, Marie asks the question, I have eczema, rosacea, and loose stools. I was wondering if my skin symptoms could be caused by a gut imbalance. Yes, they certainly could be. There's a lot of data here helping us to appreciate dysbiosis and leaky gut, their association to inflammation, and all of this associating to issues with the bowels, issues with digestive symptoms, issues with the skin. And in terms of one piece of research on this, there was a 2021 review paper that found that many skin conditions like eczema, rosacea, and psoriasis were associated with gut dysbiosis. Perhaps more importantly, there was a 2008 clinical trial, I believe this was from Leonard Weinstock, who's been on the podcast, treating SIBO with rifaximin, and they found a 50% or greater distribution of rosacea in that SIBO population that they were treating with rifaximin, and they found improvements in their rosacea. And there was another paper on this, 2022 meta-analysis, finding that probiotics could improve eczema. And they were using lactobacillus plus bifidobacterium, so category 1. And being a meta-analysis, they looked at many different trials. The dose ranged from 2 billion up to 200 billion, which is why I've repeatedly said that the 10 billion per day is a minimal effective dose, generally speaking, but you can go higher. And there's one other paper, and I'll actually link to an article that we wrote, finding that a combination of oral plus topical probiotics might be the best for skin conditions. And part of the reason for that might be coming back to this paper we've discussed so many times on the podcast in the past, but it's worth reiteration, from Frontiers in Immunology, finding that probiotic supplementation can restore balance in the microbiota or microbiota homeostasis, leading to a reduction in zonulin, a marker of leaky gut as measured in the blood, and also a corresponding reduction in inflammatory cytokines. And it's really this connection of dysbiosis, leaky gut, and inflammation that may be what underlies the immune component of conditions like joint pain, skin issues, and maybe even neurological involvement like brain fog or mental fatigue. Okay, Attila asks, should I take a motility supplement if I've been diagnosed with SIBO? In my opinion, no. You can, and they may help, but I think the utility of the prokinetics has been overstated, mainly because Mark Pimentel, who has done a lot to advance the science here, is also a motility specialist. So he's going to view the world and his research through a lens that can't help but be biased through his specialty. And there's a few reasons why I feel that the prokinetic isn't the first thing you should go to. In some conditions where we know motility can be impaired, this is where I think we can make the best case. Type 2 diabetes is one example. But what I'd rather someone do is focus on treating the motility upstream. Meaning this picture that we painted a moment ago, when there's dysbiosis, inflammation, leaky gut, if we can repair that, that's been documented to improve motility. Because when there's ongoing inflammation, the natural reparative process of the motility apparatus is hindered. So if we can use something like a probiotic and get back to balance, that can allow the motility apparatus to repair itself. Also, knowing that one of the main benefits of the prokinetics is to improve bowel regularity, I'd rather you use something like fiber, as long as you tolerate it, than a prokinetic. That all being said, you can certainly trial a prokinetic and see if you notice improvement. The other thing here that I want to make sure to mention is those with antibodies against their motility apparatus, which we can test through antivinculin and CDTB antibodies, those people don't actually have constipation, which is extremely odd. We would think that the people with constipation would have autoimmunity against the motility apparatus, impaired motility, and constipation, but they don't. So there are some gaps in the Pimentel motility prokinetic hypothesis. But again, all that being said, they have a time and a place. It's not, in my opinion, yes or no binary, but rather let's rank order in terms of what would be more important. And I would put prokinetics toward the bottom of the list. I would do other things like improve your diet, perhaps low FODMAP, probiotics, elemental dieting, antimicrobials, fiber, all as laid out in Healthy Gut, Healthy You. And then if you're still having symptoms, then you can try the natural prokinetics or lastly, a pharmaceutical prokinetic. That's the way I would order these in terms of the least invasive and most beneficial, and then followed by those that I think are more theoretical or more invasive. And there are some side effects, mainly cardiovascular, associated with at least the pharmaceutical prokinetics. Okay, Nicole asked the question, I have pseudomonas on my GI map. What should I do to treat this? Great question. It's important to clarify that pseudomonas is considered a normal resident. It can be problematic in some people, but the way I look at this, again, treating people and not numbers, our general sort of axiom that we follow in our clinic, is it's more important to treat the entire ecosystem and not try to micromanage one value, because we don't know if the pseudomonas is functioning as a problem. So we should look at your gut more holistically and treat you and your symptoms and use cues from your history to inform therapeutics. Do you feel better when you eat more fiber? Awesome. Eat more fiber. Have you used probiotics? If not, please do. Do we need to go to the typical recommendation for Pseudomonas, which is antimicrobial or antibiotic therapy? No. I think that would be a big mistake. And I think what happens in a lot of cases is they use antimicrobials before they've tended to the garden of the gut ecosystem. And I know that may sound a little bit airy-fairy, but there's good data showing us that if we do first things first, we have better healing, right? If you're eating a diet that flares you, if you haven't improved the health of your microbiota with, let's say, probiotics, and also things like exercise and time in nature and stress management, all those feed into skewing either negatively or helping to restore the balance of your ecosystem. And this will make something that can be a problem like Pseudomonas better policed by the community of co-inhabitants. If you don't do that, things are still askew and you whack with antibiotics or antimicrobials. In my experience, the probability that you're going to get back to balance and hold it is minimal because you haven't laid the groundwork encouraging balance in the gut ecosystem. That being said, there's another elephant in the room here, which is the gross inconsistency of these stool tests. Enter a split test we had done at the clinic where we took one patient, one of their bowel movements, put half in one functional medicine stool test and the other half in a different functional medicine stool test. And as you can see here, one test reported pseudomonas being high, and the other test reported pseudomonas being normal. And by the way, these were two of the best tests in the field, tests that we were using for years. And at some point, we were seeing such inconsistency. We said, let's formalize our investigation on this, perform a split test. So if you had done a different test at a different office, or just a different test in general, you may not be worried about the pseudomonas. So this might be the most compelling reason why we don't want to limit your care to what a test said, because there is wildly inconsistent findings on these tests. So use your symptoms, your history, navigate the therapeutics like we've outlined in the podcast thus far, using your symptoms to guide if you're on the right track. Because in this area of functional GI care, symptoms are by far and away the most important indicator. As I've said before, that's not always the case. There are exceptions wherein, let's say for thyroid health, the labs are actually much more accurate than the symptoms. But in functional GI care, rules are different because the testing here is so early, inaccurate, and or because there's such variability in the gut, we can't limit our therapeutic decisions to a lab marker, but we can look at, okay, what of these tools that are well studied and safe will be the right key to restoring balance in your ecosystem, the 1,000 some odd bacteria, and the corresponding leaky gut and potentially inflammation. Well, what will tell us when we've hit that mark is when you have the best symptomatic response. That will tell you what is the net effect across the entire ecosystem, including things like dysbiosis, inflammation, and leaky gut. Okay, Nicole, hope that helps. Jerry asks the question, what if a patient has no symptoms, but DNA stool testing found leaky gut? I don't have symptoms, so I can't tell if what my doctor prescribed is helping. Phenomenal question. And this is another, I think, pivotal piece of science that was published this year, meta-analysis in the Journal of Frontiers in Immunology. And what they found was that probiotics reduced blood zonulin, but did not reduce stool zonulin. Okay, so this brings back in the same paper we were discussing a moment ago, the 2023 meta-analysis. Now, in this paper, there's one other finding that's quite important. They did show that probiotics can restore homeostasis or balance in the gut microbiota. Correspondingly, can reduce the inflammatory cytokines associated with leaky gut, like TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, can reduce the amount of actual leakage through the gut, direct measurement of LPS, and reduce serum or blood zonulin. But guess what? There was no change in stool zonulin, leading me to conclude, as the only conclusion possible here, that stool zonulin is not a viable way of tracking leaky gut. So I'm assuming that your provider is looking at this on the stool test and isn't looking at a corollary blood marker. And if that's the case, I would not regard the findings, because we have a very impressive meta-analysis, which, by the way, this has been corroborated by some other studies published after it, that when people improve their gut health and resolve their leaky gut, serum or blood zonulin changes and stool zonulin doesn't. And this is probably why, as part of that same stool test investigation, we also assessed zonulin. And one test, stool zonulin was normal. The other test, stool zonulin was high. The same person, the same stool sample. So if you have no symptoms, I would not be worried about a positive stool zonulin. Again, always check this with your doctor, but remember that these findings are very new and a lot of clinicians may not have heard of these yet. Okay, and then Sabrina asked a question. I've had countless patients who've already tried probiotics and dietary changes, etc. We do a test and find a parasite, fungus, or H. pylori, which, when treated, their symptoms finally improve. Your proposal is to treat all patients based upon symptoms without expensive functional testing. Doesn't this go against the test, don't guess philosophy in functional medicine? This is a phenomenal question, Sabrina, and I'm so glad that you asked it. And this was the paradigm I was operating underneath for the past 9 years. A few points. firstly, true parasites, as someone who had one, an amoeba, are incredibly rare. If we're loosely labeling Blasto or Endolimax nana as a parasite, then okay, people will have parasites, but those aren't true parasites. And I'll share with you a review paper concluding that E. nana is non-pathogenic. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And I think what's happening in the situation you're describing, which was me for many years, is that we're conflating someone feels better from antimicrobial therapy with treating the labs was a success. We know that antimicrobials will help a lot of people. If you're withholding antimicrobials until you've done a test, all you're doing is just saying, well, I'm not going to treat with antimicrobials until I do a test. You're going to find something on one of these tests, and then you're going to give antimicrobials. And because we know how effective antimicrobials are, you're likely going to see a response. This is why, as an example, we know that rifaximin will improve IBS symptoms even in patients without SIBO. In fact, there's been many studies that have found that non-SIBO patients still improve from rifaximin. In fact, not that I'm a huge fan of the FDA per se, but the FDA approved rifaximin for IBS without the need for any stool test. Also remember that SIBO is found in only about 37% of those with IBS. So if we see a high response rate of IBS to rifaximin, then that tells us that there's more to the antibiotic or the antimicrobial therapy than what we think we're doing on a lab test, right? And, again, using our split test depends on what test you run, right? Again, this is the same patient's stool just put into two different lab companies' kits. Candida on one, no Candida on the other, Archimantia low on the one and normal on the other, Klebsiella and Pseudomonas on the one, not on the other, Zonulin normal on the one and high on the other. And by the way, look at the disparity. The first test that has more of the bad stuff has normal zonulin, and then the second test that has less of the bad stuff, no bad players, has high zonulin. So there's rampant inconsistencies. And this is why I come back to the clinical development curve, or what I also term the complexity efficacy curve. As we get better as clinicians, we should get to a point where we're using less testing. And that's just acquisition of skill over time. And then separate to that, the fact that the stool tests are so wildly inconsistent, I think we should start having the conversation that if we're not assessing, we're guessing paradigm was well intended, but somewhere along the line, the lab companies got us to think that testing and assessing are the same thing. And I would strongly argue that what is more important is to listen to the individual. Someone before you has symptoms. Maybe their symptoms got worse when they went keto. Maybe one of their symptoms is insomnia and fatigue. And when you inquire, they tell you that those symptoms got much worse on keto. And maybe at current, they're eating still somewhat low carb because they think that carbs are going to cause them to have diabetes even though they're underweight, right? Just painting a picture of one scenario. Or perhaps they've said that when they eat more vegetables, they feel worse. Or perhaps they haven't done probiotics. Or perhaps they've done probiotics but only seen a partial response, right? All these things are assessments, I would argue, that we can use to hone in on what to do. And there may be a time and a place exception for where we want to use testing, but even in the area, let's say, of vector-borne microbes, where you may argue that testing is so important, there's a movement now to look at someone's symptoms and treat their symptoms with the best educated hypothesis of what organisms might be the culprit, because the testing is so inaccurate. And there seem to be, this is probably the most key point, far more people who will respond to therapy than will be positive for a lab marker telling you to use said therapy. So when you look at it this way, if we're limiting our care to the tests, we're actually going to hold back therapies that could help someone, SIBO most namely. If you wouldn't give rifaximin or antimicrobials if someone didn't have SIBO, then what about all those people who would have improvements in IBS irrespective of their SIBO status without having SIBO? So again, I'm very empathetic to your situation, and it led me for many years to think that it was the antimicrobials, that were treating the test result, and that's where the improvements came from. And it was actually a case study from Robert Abbott, and this was many, many years ago, back when he was doing his hospital internship, and he was very limited in testing. So he just empirically gave someone with symptoms antimicrobials. And I remember reading his case study and saying, oh my goodness, Rob, how could you give someone antimicrobials unless you've tested? And what do you know? That person came back and felt fantastic. That was an early observation that got me saying, maybe I don't have to have someone do, at the time, the two tandem stool tests that we were doing and spend $800-900. And maybe we can look at this in a hierarchy and understand that the antimicrobials are going to do way more than treat just one marker. They're going to treat many things. They're going to skew the entire bacterial colony, potentially resolve SIBO, fungus. They may even help with motility, with leaky gut. So for all those reasons, I think we should start rejecting the lab testing. And if we're not doing that, we're guessing. And really think about, if we're not assessing, then we're guessing. And assessment is understanding the person meticulously, their history, their symptoms, their prior responses to therapies. That's where the gold is. And at least as it pertains specifically to the SIBO breath tests and the functional stool tests, I don't think they're helping people. And I think you'll actually become more astute as a clinician if you stop doing these tests, these inaccurate, inconsistent tests, and really start very fastidiously assessing the person right in front of you. So that is the questions for this Q&A. I do hope you'll comment. I hope this helps, and I'll talk to you next time.